We all think we know the story of the Titanic, the magnificent, unsinkable ship that hit an iceberg and sank on its maiden voyage, claiming over 1,500 souls. It's a simple, tragic tale. But what if I told you that story is a lie? What if the iceberg was just the final blow in a long chain of catastrophic failures, hidden secrets, and fatal human errors that started long before the ship even left the port? Today, we're unmasking the 7 hidden reasons the Titanic was doomed from the start. Our story begins not in the freezing waters of the North Atlantic, but deep inside the ship in coal bunker number 6. For weeks before the Titanic even set sail from Southampton, a fire was raging in this bunker. This wasn't a small flame. It was an intense, uncontrollable blaze, reaching temperatures of nearly 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. The crew fought it relentlessly, shoveling tons of burning coal into the ship's furnaces just to keep it from spreading. Why was this covered up? Because this fire was slowly cooking the very steel bulkhead that stood between the coal bunker and the forward compartments. The extreme heat made the steel brittle and fragile, fatally compromising its strength. When the iceberg struck that very spot, the bulkhead didn't just buckle, it shattered. The fire had turned a strong steel wall into glass. This wasn't an act of God. It was a disaster waiting to happen, sealed by a corporate decision to sail anyway. The ship was already wounded before its journey began. Next, let's climb to the crow's nest, where lookouts Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee scanned the dark horizon. Their job was to be the eyes of the ship, the first line of defense. But on that starless night, they were missing their most crucial tool, binoculars. The reason is almost absurd. Just before the voyage, the ship's second officer, David Blair, was suddenly transferred off the crew. In his hurried departure, he forgot to hand over a single, small brass key, the key to the locker where the binoculars were stored. That one forgotten key meant the lookouts had to rely on their naked eyes to spot danger in the pitch-black, icy waters. Experts believe that with binoculars, they would have seen the iceberg minutes earlier. Minutes that could have been the difference between a close call and a direct hit. A tiny key, a moment of forgetfulness, and the course of history was changed forever. As the night wore on, the warnings started flooding in. The Titanic was equipped with a state-of-the-art wireless radio system, but the operators, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, were swamped. They were employees of the Marconi Company, not the White Star Line, and a huge part of their job was sending personal telegrams for wealthy first-class passengers, a service that earned them extra money. As multiple ships in the area sent urgent warnings about a massive ice field directly in the Titanic's path, these crucial messages were pushed aside. They were either ignored, not passed to the bridge, or in one infamous exchange, met with sheer arrogance. The SS Californian, a nearby ship that had already stopped for the night because the ice was so thick, sent a final, direct warning. A frustrated Jack Phillips cut them off, replying, shut up, I am busy." He was busy sending passenger messages. That was the last warning the Titanic ever received. The operator on the Californian, insulted, simply switched off his radio and went to bed just minutes before the collision. This brings us to one of the most haunting parts of the tragedy, the silent observer. After the Titanic struck the iceberg, the SS Californian was so close, less than 20 miles away, that its crew could clearly see the lights of the massive liner on the horizon. As the Titanic began to sink, it fired white distress rockets into the sky, the universal signal for help. The crew of the Californian saw them. They woke their captain, Stanley Lord, and reported seeing 8 rockets. But Captain Lord made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He dismissed them as company signals or maybe even fireworks from a party on board. He refused to wake his radio operator. For hours, the Californian sat motionless, its crew watching as the lights of the world's greatest ship blinked out, one by one. Had they responded, they could have reached the Titanic before it sank, or at the very least, saved hundreds of people from freezing to death in the water. They were so close, yet they did nothing. But the chain of failures doesn't end there. Let's talk about the ship's design itself. The Titanic was praised for its watertight compartments, which were supposed to keep it afloat even if 4 of them flooded. The problem? The walls separating these compartments weren't tall enough. They didn't reach all the way up to the main deck. Think of it like an ice cube tray. If you fill one section with water, it will eventually spill over into the next, and the next, and the next. That's exactly what happened on the Titanic. As the first 5 compartments filled with water, the bow dipped forward, and the water simply spilled over the top of each bulkhead, flooding the ship from the front to the back. It was a fatal design flaw, a cost-cutting measure that rendered the unsinkable ship's greatest safety feature completely useless. Even the materials used to build the ship played a role. The Titanic was held together by over 3 million rivets. While the main hull used high-quality steel rivets, evidence suggests that in the bow and stern sections, the areas most difficult to work on, the builders used lower-quality iron rivets. These rivets were more brittle, especially in the freezing temperatures of the North Atlantic. When the Iceberg sideswiped the ship, these weaker rivets likely popped and broke apart, allowing the hull plates to separate and water to pour in much faster than anyone anticipated. It was another shortcut, another compromise in the name of speed and budget that contributed to the ship's rapid demise. Finally, in the chaos of the sinking, we find one of the most bizarre survival stories. Chief Baker Charles Joffin knew the end was near, but instead of panicking, he went to his cabin and began drinking. A lot. He drank 2 entire bottles of whiskey. He then helped load lifeboats, throwing women and children in, before calmly stepping off the stern of the ship as it plunged beneath the waves. He should have died from hypothermia within minutes, but he didn't. He treaded water for over 2 hours in the -2 degrees Celsius water until he was found by a returning lifeboat. How did he survive? The massive amount of alcohol in his system, which would normally be fatal, may have acted as a bizarre form of internal antifreeze, slowing the effects of the cold. He was so intoxicated that he barely even felt the freezing water. His story is a strange testament to the unpredictable nature of survival. So, the sinking of the Titanic wasn't a simple story of a ship versus an iceberg. It was a perfect storm of human error and corporate greed. A secret fire that weakened the hull, a missing key that left the lookouts blind, ignored warnings from operators more focused on profit, a fatal design flaw in its watertight compartments, substandard rivets that couldn't hold, and a nearby ship that simply watched from the darkness. The Iceberg didn't sink the Titanic alone. It was the final, tragic push for a ship that was already doomed by a series of hidden failures. The greatest maritime disaster in history was not an accident, it was an inevitability. Thanks for watching. If you found this dive into history as fascinating as I did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more untold stories. See you next time.